Welcome back. If you watched part one, thanks for coming back. We still have more true scary encounters to dive into. Stories of strange creatures, eerie paranormal experiences, crawlers, dogman, not deer, and other things that simply refuse to be explained. So get comfortable, grab your favorite drink, dim the lights if you dare, and let's get back to the stories. At 11 years old, Kieran almost reached out to pet what looked like a stray dog until their father whispered four words they've never forgotten. Don't pet that thing. The person who shared the story wanted to remain anonymous, so we'll call them Kieran. Kieran says this happened while visiting family in Ladakh, a remote mountainous region in northern India near the borders of Tibet and China. Even as an adult, Kieran doesn't believe they're the type to jump to supernatural conclusions, but they've never been able to explain what happened. The family was staying in a rural home high in the mountains, surrounded by forests and some of the clearest night skies Kieran had ever seen. The day before the encounter, they went hiking in the Himalayas. Without warning, clear skies turned into freezing rain and heavy hail. Everyone ran for cover. Being the smallest in the group, Kieran squeezed beneath a massive rock that formed a shallow cave. At first, it seemed like the perfect shelter. Then they noticed something strange. Even with the strong wind and hail outside, the space beneath the rock was completely dry. A wave of dread suddenly washed over them. The tunnel stretched back much farther into the mountain than they realized, and Kieran became convinced that something had been sitting there moments before they had crawled inside. Without looking back, they scrambled out into the storm and insisted the family head back down the mountain. They never told anyone why. They convinced themselves it was just the altitude. But the next night, around midnight, Kieran and their father decided to go stargazing. To escape the light from the house, they walked down a narrow path leading toward the edge of the mountain. Everything was unnaturally quiet. There was no wind, no insects, there were no crickets. There was only the sound of gravel beneath their feet. As Kieran's father swept the flashlight across the path, something rustled in the bushes. A head slowly emerged. At first, Kieran thought it was a stray dog, but something was terribly wrong. Its face looked almost human. Its eyes weren't reflective like every other animal Kieran had ever seen. They were flat, matte black eyes that seemed to stare straight through them. Thinking it was just another friendly stray, Kieran instinctively reached out to pet it. The creature stepped forward, its legs bent at impossible angles. Its joints were much higher than they should have been. Its neck was unnaturally long. Its fur was so sleek that it almost looked like skin. Then Kieran felt their father's hand clamp tightly onto their shoulder. They turned around. Their father had gone completely pale. In a quiet voice, he whispered, "Don't pet that thing." When Kieran looked back, the creature slowly retreated into the bushes, but it never looked away. It never blinked, and it never broke eye contact. Then their father switched off the flashlight. The instant the light disappeared, so did the creature. There were no footsteps or rustling leaves or any sounds at all. And that's what still haunts Kieran the most. There was nowhere for it to go. Behind it was a steep mountainside with bushes and nearby homes on either side. Yet whatever they had been staring at vanished without leaving a trace. Some people believe that there may be an explanation in the local folklore. In Ladakhi and Tibetan traditions, mountains and caves are believed to be the home of powerful spirits known as Yan and Sen. Legends say disturbing these places can bring an overwhelming feeling of dread, unnatural silence, and even encounters with shape-shifting beings that imitate animals but have disturbingly human features and unnatural limbs. Whether Kieran encountered something from local legend, an unusual animal, or something science has yet to explain, they still don't have an answer. So what do you think Kieran saw that night? And I'm going to apologize now for the way I butchered the names. Please leave your comments for Kieran. The motion light kept turning on. Then they realized something was standing outside. The The person who shared this story wanted to remain anonymous, so we'll call him Reed. Back in the winter of 2023, Reed was visiting family in rural Wisconsin. They lived in a heavily wooded area and the ground was covered in snow. Around 2 a.m, Reed and his younger cousin were still awake, sitting in his cousin's room playing Crash Bandicoot on the Nintendo Switch, when the motion-activated porch light suddenly turned on. At first they didn't think too much of it. The family had a raccoon that was always getting into the cat food, so they figured that was probably all it was. Then the lights came on again. Still, they weren't worried. A little while later, they shut off the game because they had to get up early. But when Reed glanced out the window, the porch light was still lit. Whatever had triggered it hadn't left. The two walked over to the window, but at first they couldn't see anything. Then his cousin elbowed him quietly and said, "Look." Standing near the edge of the woods was a tall, animal-like figure. Its eyes reflected the porch light so intensely that they looked like they were glowing orange. Reed said it felt like the creature was staring directly back at them. Their first thought was that it had to be a coyote, but it was much too large, nearly the size of a person, maybe even bigger, and it didn't resemble any coyote either of them had ever seen. A few moments later, the motion light finally shut off as whatever it was walked away. Feeling uneasy, they covered the window with a towel since there weren't any curtains and tried to get some sleep. The next morning, they told Reed's aunt and uncle what had happened. They admitted they'd noticed the porch light during the night, but assumed it had either been the boys or just another raccoon. After hearing the description, they suggested it was probably a coyote. But when everyone went outside, they found something strange. Large footprints were pressed into the melting snow. The tracks weren't perfectly clear because the snow had been thawing overnight, but they were still unusually big. Even Reed's aunt and uncle couldn't identify them. They weren't frightened, just confused by what had left them there. What's interesting is that stories like this have been reported in Wisconsin for decades. Some people compare sightings like Reed's to the Beast of Bray Road, a legendary wolf-like cryptid often described as nearly human-sized with glowing amber or orange eyes and unusually large tracks. Others point to indigenous legends like the Wendigo, although the traditional stories describe it as a spiritual being rather than a physical creature. Of course, there's another possibility. A wolf, coyote, or even a black bear can appear much larger in the dark. Their eyes can glow brightly when caught in motion light, and melting snow can make ordinary tracks look enormous. So what do you think Reed and his cousin saw standing at the edge of those Wisconsin woods that winter night? Please leave your comments below. I'll be sharing a link to this video with Reed. Something with giant yellow eyes kept getting closer, but only when Casey wasn't looking. The person who shared this story wanted to remain anonymous, so we're going to call them Casey. This happened on their grandparents' farm in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, during Casey's final year of school. The farm dated back to the early 1900s and had a tragic history, including 2 people who perished on the land. Strange things had happened there before, shadows, knocks, and objects moving, but nothing like this. One evening, one of Casey's pregnant cows was having a difficult labor. Around 8 p.m., they grabbed a spotlight and headed to the barn in case the cow needed help. As Casey stood at the entrance watching the cow, an incredibly high-pitched scream echoed from one of the nearby feed camps. They swept the flashlight toward the sound and spotted only one thing: a pair of glowing yellow eyes. They were far away, so Casey assumed it was probably a wild animal that had wandered onto the property. A few minutes later, the scream came again. This time, the eyes were much closer. They didn't move, they just stared back, reflecting the flashlight like mirrors. Casey couldn't make out a body, only that the eyes seemed unusually high off the ground. They even wondered if it might be some kind of owl, although the height didn't make sense. Then it happened a third time. Casey looked back at the cow for only a few seconds. The scream came again. When they turned around, whatever it was had covered roughly 50 meters in what felt like only 3 seconds. Now it was only about 20 to 30 meters away. Casey could barely make out a dark humanoid silhouette behind those enormous yellow eyes. No facial features, no clear body, just a shape standing perfectly still. And here's what terrified them most. It never moved while they were looking at it. It only seemed to get closer whenever they looked away. The cow suddenly stood up. Casey didn't wait to see if the calf was okay. They backed away without taking their eyes off the figure, got inside the house, locked every door, and didn't sleep that night. Every time they closed their eyes, they saw those yellow eyes staring back. The next morning, Casey returned to where they'd seen it. There was an old concrete fence post standing there, about 6.5 feet tall. Based on where the eyes had been, they would have been at least 2 feet higher than the top of that post. Casey never saw or heard it again. Later, they described the encounter to a co-worker who had grown up less than 15 miles from that same farm and was familiar with local Zulu traditions. He offered 2 possible explanations. The first was an old piece of regional folklore about a creature that leaves tracks and can be heard, but supposedly only exists when it isn't being directly observed, as if it disappears the moment it's truly seen. The second was a spirit said to remain where it died, endlessly replaying its final moments. When Casey mentioned there were old Zulu graves scattered across the farm beneath the rock piles, the coworker felt that explanation fit better. Casey still isn't sure what happened that night. Maybe it was something unexplained, or maybe fear made an ordinary encounter seem far worse than it really was. What do you think Casey saw that night? And for anyone who's an animal lover, don't worry. I asked Casey what happened to the calf and the cow, and they assured me that they were both okay, and that the calf grew up to be a beautiful cow. So if you have any comments for Casey, please leave them below. A Navy veteran said one night in the Louisiana bayou changed everything he believed. Troy says he never believed in the paranormal. Not Bigfoot, not aliens, not the Loch Ness Monster, nothing. After serving in the U.S. Navy, he considered himself a practical person who relied on facts, not stories. But in April of 2025, just after finishing his military contract, he returned home to southeastern Louisiana. His best friend Jordan had just purchased 65 acres of wooded bayou land, and the two of them planned to spend 2 days exploring it. They wanted to make sure there weren't any abandoned structures, people living on the property, or anything dangerous hidden in the woods. To cover more ground, they split up and camped separately. The first night was completely uneventful. Troy built a fire, ate a can of beans, and slept soundly. The next morning, though, he noticed fresh tracks circling his campsite that hadn't been there the night before. He assumed they belonged to a hog or maybe a coyote. As the day went on, something else started bothering him. No matter where he walked, he felt like someone was watching him. At first, he assumed it was Jordan checking on him, but later that afternoon, Troy stopped at a small creek to cool off. Every time he put his head under water, he became convinced something else was nearby, watching him. He'd struggled with anxiety after an incident during his Navy service, so he convinced himself he was just being paranoid. That evening, he met back up with Jordan. Jordan mentioned he'd found the foundation of what looked like an old shack hidden in the woods. Then Troy asked him a simple question. "Did you ever feel like something was watching you today?" Jordan didn't hesitate. He said yes. Neither of them admitted they were scared, but they silently agreed they wouldn't both go to sleep at the same time. Troy volunteered to take the first watch. Armed with a weapon, he sat on a rock overlooking the darkness. He explains that while he wasn't Special Forces in the Navy, he'd worked in communications. He'd grown up as a Cajun around firearms his entire life. For about an hour, everything seemed normal. Then he heard it. A strange knocking sound. It reminded him of deer antlers hitting together, but not quite. At first, it came every minute, then every 30 seconds. Then it became constant, and it was getting closer. Thinking it might scare off whatever was out there and wake Jordan, Troy fired a warning shot into the woods. The knocking immediately stopped. Jordan woke up and grabbed his weapon. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the sound came back. Only this time, it was so loud that Troy said it was almost deafening. Jordan dropped to the ground, covering his ears. Troy says years of hearing loss from the Navy may have been the only reason he was still able to function. Then he switched on a powerful light, and finally, he saw what had been making the noise. According to Troy, it looked like a deer, but every part of its body seemed unnaturally stretched and elongated. Its skin, or maybe its fur, looked pale brown or dirty white, but its face is what stayed with him ever since. The creature had normal buck antlers, but its head was far too small for its body. Its eyes bulged outward, and surrounding its face was a ring of dark hair that reminded him of the petals of a sunflower. What you're seeing on the screen now is an AI-generated illustration based entirely on Troy's description. It isn't a real photograph. It's simply an artist's interpretation of what he remembers seeing that night. Troy says he genuinely believed he was about to die. He fired his weapon. He believes he hit the creature because it cried out in pain, but the sound it made, he says he'll never forget it. He kept shooting until the weapon was empty, before switching to a different weapon and continuing to fire as it disappeared into the trees. Eventually, they heard one last cry echo through the woods. Then everything went quiet. Neither man stayed another second. They abandoned nearly all of their camping gear and ran straight back to their trucks. Later, while trying to explain what they'd seen, Troy's brother Bo jokingly gave it a name, the sunflower deer. The nickname stuck. It's now been over a year. Troy still doesn't know what he and Jordan encountered. He says it wasn't anything he can explain, and despite growing up in the Louisiana bayou, he hasn't gone back into the woods since. As strange as Troy's description sounds, there are a few pieces of regional folklore that share surprising similarities. One comes from the Choctaw tradition. Stories tell of a mysterious swamp-dwelling being known as the Kashi-Hoto-Palo, a creature described as having deer-like features, an unusually small head, and terrifying cries that echo through the marshes to frighten hunters who wander too deep into the swamps. According to the stories, it also moves so quickly that witnesses rarely get a clear look before it disappears. Another possibility comes from more modern southern folklore known as the knot deer. Witnesses describe something that looks almost like a normal deer at first glance, until they notice that its proportions are all wrong. Unnaturally long limbs, strange eyes, bizarre sounds, and an overwhelming feeling of dread that seems to come before the sighting itself. Of course, there's no evidence that either of these legends explain what Troy and Jordan experienced that night, but it's hard to ignore how closely some of those descriptions resemble what they reported seeing in that Louisiana bayou. So what do you think they encountered that night? A misidentified animal? An undiscovered species? Or something that's been hiding in southern folklore for generations? Please leave your comments below. She thought she was watching a deer cross the road until it stood up and walked into the woods on two legs. The person who shared the story goes by the handle Ginger Mutant X. She gave me permission to tell the story, and we're gonna call her G, just to keep things simple. G lives in Ada, North Carolina, about 40 to 50 miles from the Croatan National Forest. She was raised camping and hiking, spending the first 20 years of her life exploring the woods around Craven County, so she knows the local wildlife and what it looks like. About 5 to 7 years ago, she was driving home one night on Highway 102. She had just passed a small fire station when she spotted what she initially thought was a deer crossing the road. But as it reached the other side, it made a strange leap. When it landed, it walked into the tree line on 2 feet. G said it was much too thin to be a bear, but it was obviously not a deer either. To this day, she has no explanation for what she witnessed, and she still gets chills every time she drives through that stretch of road. So G shared a lot of information about Eastern Carolina with me. What's interesting is that Eastern North Carolina has no shortage of eerie history and folklore. Just off the coast lies the graveyard of the Atlantic, where thousands of ships have been lost. Nearby is Bath, once home to the infamous pirate Blackbeard, and not far away is Roanoke Island, where the lost colony mysteriously disappeared after carving the word Croatoan into a tree. Add in Civil War history throughout the region, and it's easy to see why so many unexplained stories have been passed down for generations. Of course, none of that explains what G saw that night. So what do you think crossed the road? A misidentified animal, an unusual encounter, or something we'll never be able to explain? Please leave your comments for G. She is tagged in the caption. She stepped outside to get some fresh air and caught something peeking around the corner of her trailer. The person who shared the story wanted to remain anonymous, but we're going to call her Marie. She says this happened while living in a secluded trailer deep in the mountains of southeastern Kentucky. Their front porch faced nothing but dense woods. One evening around dusk, she stepped outside after doing laundry. Suddenly, she had the unmistakable feeling that someone was watching her. When she looked to her right, she froze. A tall, paper-white figure was hunched around the corner of the trailer with its hands against the walls, staring directly at her. It was incredibly skinny, appeared completely naked, and she couldn't make out any facial features. The moment it realized she'd seen it, it jerked its head back behind the trailer and disappeared almost instantly. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just a person, but nothing about it looked human. Then she remembered what had happened just a few nights earlier. Her husband had heard leaves rustling outside and jokingly challenged whatever was there to come out. Seconds later, something slammed into the side of the trailer with such force it sounded like a tree had crashed into the house. The next day, they found a large gash high on the trailer, about 6 to 7 feet off the ground, right where Marie would later see the figure. To make things even stranger, an old cemetery sat nearby, and she'd always had an uneasy feeling around that area. Some people believe encounters like this matched the White Thing, a legendary Kentucky creature said to watch people from behind trees and buildings before vanishing. Others compare it to the mysterious pale crawlers reported throughout Appalachia, paper white humanoids often seen near caves and isolated homes. Something interesting I found out about these creatures is the idea that if you're cold, they're cold, and that they're often found peering into people's windows or standing up against the sides of houses or trailers seeking heat. So, what do you think Marie saw watching her from the corner of that trailer? Please leave your comments below. He thought he was just walking home with snacks until something pale started crawling toward him from the woods. The person who shared this story wanted to remain anonymous, so for the story we'll call him Joe. Around 4 one morning in Opp, Alabama, Joe left his trailer and walked to a nearby convenience store. He was a night owl, and this wasn't unusual. He'd made the same walk countless times over the last 10 years, even in the middle of the night. After buying a few snacks and drinks, he started heading home. The road passed a small wooded area between town and the trailer park. As he entered one of the darkest stretches, he suddenly heard something moving through the brush only a few feet away. Because the area occasionally attracted people looking for trouble, Joe immediately pulled out the box cutter he carried and flipped it open. Then he called out, warning whatever was there that he was armed. As his eyes adjusted to the darkness, he caught sight of what he describes as a pale, human-like figure moving low to the ground on all fours. It seemed to be trying to move quietly through the brush. Joe never made direct eye contact with it. At first, every instinct told him that it was a threat. But the moment he challenged it, everything changed. The creature froze. Joe said the overwhelming feeling of danger disappeared almost instantly. Keeping his weapon ready, he calmly walked toward the nearest streetlight without running or looking back. Whatever it was never followed him. He believes it either became curious, realized he was willing to fight back, or simply decided he wasn't worth the risk. The encounter stuck with him because it was completely out of the ordinary. He had walked that road for nearly a decade and never experienced anything like it. In fact, he'd just been there a week before without seeing anything unusual, leading him to believe that whatever he encountered had only recently appeared in the area. Ironically, the one night his phone battery was nearly dead was the one night he had nothing to record with. The following day, Joe returned to the area in daylight. He found very little evidence, only a few freshly broken twigs scattered throughout the brush near where he'd first seen the movement. He couldn't determine whether they had been broken by the creature or were simply the result of something passing through the vegetation. He also looked into possible places something could hide nearby. There were no known caves in the area, but there were drainage culverts, abandoned structures, fallen trees, and dense woods that could provide cover. Without trespassing, there wasn't much more he could investigate. Joe said he isn't sharing this story for entertainment. He simply wanted to document what happened in case anyone else has experienced something similar. His description has led some people to compare the encounter to reports of so-called pale crawlers, unverified sightings of pale human-like figures reported in wooded areas across the country. Alabama also has its own long-standing folklore surrounding mysterious pale creatures in the forest, including the legend of the White Thing. And in the oral traditions of some southeastern indigenous peoples, there are stories of dangerous beings said to inhabit remote wilderness. None of these legends proves what Joe saw that morning. They do show that stories about strange figures in the woods have been told in this region for generations. So what do you think Joe encountered on that dark Alabama road? Was it an unknown animal, someone hiding in the brush, or something that's been whispered about for much longer than we realize? Leave your comments for Joe below. Olivia was only 8 years old when something happened that she and her cousin still talk about to this day. They were spending the night at their aunt's house. At the time, their aunt was battling severe Lyme disease. She often claimed she saw terrifying things whenever she tried to sleep, and eventually things became so unsettling, she invited a psychic to cleanse and protect the house. Late one night, Olivia and her cousin walked into the hallway. The layout formed a T-shape. Their younger cousin's bedrooms were at the end on the left, and their aunt's room was directly across on the right. The only light came from a bathroom down the hall, leaving everything dim and shadowy. As they started walking, they both froze. A hunched-over figure with unusually long arms and legs and dark, stringy hair suddenly burst from one of the children's bedrooms. It didn't walk, it ran, almost crawled, sprinting from left to right, across the hallway and disappeared into their aunt's room. It moved impossibly fast. Olivia can't remember exactly what color it was. It wasn't a dark shadow. If anything, she thinks it had a pale flesh-colored appearance, but everything happened so quickly that she can't be certain. Neither of them screamed. They were completely frozen with fear. Years later, they still remember every detail and still ask each other the same question: what did we see? Some people would say it was a simple trick of the light, or two frightened children misinterpreting what they saw in a dark hallway. Others point to folklore surrounding pale, crawling humanoids or malevolent entities said to lurk around homes where fear and suffering are already present. In both indigenous traditions and paranormal beliefs, there's also a long-standing idea that negative entities are drawn to places where people are physically weakened or emotionally vulnerable. Since Olivia's aunt was seriously ill and believed something was haunting the house, the psychic cleansing may have been an attempt to remove whatever she felt had attached itself to the home. Whether it was an unexplained creature, a shared misperception, or something far more sinister, what do you think Olivia and her cousin witnessed that night? Her family had one rule every summer in the mountains of West Virginia. If you hear something in the woods, no you didn't. Last summer, she finally learned why. This story was shared by someone who wanted to remain anonymous, so we're going to call her Emily. Every summer since she was a baby, Emily and her family traveled from Massachusetts to the Charleston, West Virginia area for their annual family reunion. Growing up, the adults always repeated the same Appalachian rules. Don't whistle, don't stare into the trees, and if you hear something, no you didn't. As kids, they obeyed those rules. As they got older, they started laughing them off. The reunion was always at their great-aunt's old fieldstone house, where her grandfather and his siblings grew up. The property stretched up the mountainside, with Davis Creek running between the house and the woods. Emily spent every summer catching crawdads, hunting for petrified wood, and waiting for the lightning bugs to come out. But as the older cousins grew up, the stories changed. They talked about strange rustling in the woods, massive footprints, dark figures watching from the tree line, and deer carcasses left beside the creek. Emily never believed them until last summer. She and her 3 siblings stayed by the creek later than usual as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. Their aunt called them back to the porch, but they stayed, joking about whether the old stories were just Appalachian folklore. Then they heard it, rustling, across the creek. At first they assumed maybe it was a deer or a coyote, but the sound kept getting closer, until it stopped directly across the creek. Then, silence. An overwhelming feeling of being watched settled over them. Suddenly, a blood-curdling, bird-like screech shattered the darkness. They ran. As Emily turned toward the house, she heard something massive splash into the creek. Her oldest cousin yelled from the porch, "Don't look back, just run." But she did. Standing in the darkness was something enormous. She estimates it was at least 8 feet tall. Its skin looked almost reptilian. Its eyes glowed, and around its mouth was what appeared to be a reddish-colored fluid. For one terrifying moment, they locked eyes. The creature screamed again. Emily snapped out of it and sprinted. As she ran, she heard deep panting beside her ear and what sounded like multiple heavy footsteps closing in behind her. She made it to the porch, turned around, and there was nothing there. Her cousin simply looked at her with a terrified expression that silently said, "I told you so." No one was willing to walk back to their cars that night. Inside the house, they heard heavy footsteps circling outside the windows and scratching at the front door. No one slept. When morning came, the noises had stopped. Outside, deep gouges had been carved into the front door, far deeper than they believed any local animal could make. The grass around the house had been flattened, as if something incredibly heavy had circled it all night. And down by the creek, a black bear lay torn apart. Then Emily's aunt quietly said something she'll never forget. "It was angry last night." No one questioned her. Her uncle quietly replaced the front door. He mowed over the flattened grass, and the family has never spoken about that night again. So what could Emily have encountered? Some believe her description resembles the Grafton Monster, a legendary West Virginia cryptid described as a towering, leather-skinned creature reported in remote forests. Others point to Appalachian and indigenous folklore, which tells of territorial beings said to inhabit the deep woods, entities that demand respect and are best left undisturbed. Her description of reptilian-looking skin, glowing eyes, powerful claws, and a piercing screech has also reminded some people of lesser-known reptilian cryptid legends associated with creeks and waterways. And because of that unforgettable bird-like scream, others compare stories like hers to the legendary Snallygaster, a fearsome creature said to haunt parts of Appalachia. Of course, there are also natural explanations. Darkness, wildlife, fear, and the way sounds echo through mountain valleys can create unforgettable experiences. But whatever Emily saw that night, her family has never talked about it again. And every summer, when the lightning bugs begin to glow, she makes sure she's already on the porch before darkness falls. So what do you think Emily encountered out there in West Virginia? Please leave your comments below. That brings us to the end of tonight's compilation. If you stayed with me until the very end, thank you. Whether you've been here since the beginning or you just found the channel tonight, I'm so grateful you chose to spend your time here. This little community keeps growing because of people like you who watch, like, comment, share, and tell others about Midnight with Maggie. It truly means the world to me. Now I want to hear from you. Which story stuck with you the most? Which one gave you the chills or made you stop and think? Leave a comment below. I genuinely love reading your thoughts and hearing your theories. And if you've had an unexplained encounter of your own, don't keep it to yourself. Whether it happened in the woods, on a lonely road, in your home, or somewhere you'll never forget, send it my way. Your story could be featured in a future episode. Until we meet again, thank you for keeping the campfire burning and the stories alive. Stay curious, stay kind, and if you hear something calling your name from the darkness, maybe let it call twice, or maybe just ignore it altogether. Good night, and I'll see you next time.